The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind, the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this 7-day session here in June 2023 at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to share with you today some of the teachings of the very great Korean Soen master. Soen is the way Zen is pronounced in Korean, as Chan is the way Zen is pronounced in China, and so on. He lived in the 12th century and is still incredibly famous for his deep, deep insight and wisdom. And interestingly enough, he lived at a time very much like ours. He was born in 1158, and prior to that, for at least a century, there was increasing discontent within the higher-ups in the government. There was a king, there was a lineage, and eventually, over time, that lineage and the succeeding lineage were overthrown. The back and forth of coups and counter-coups and all the dysfunction in the government, all the negative interactions among government, the government hierarchy, was so much like what is happening now in our own country. It was a time of rebellion, which is a very, very pertinent time for Zen practice, for spiritual practice, because when things are going easily, things are going smoothly, things are nice, there's much less motivation to search within for some level of peace. But when things are crazy outside, and we get to a point where we recognize that there's nothing outside that is going to end up giving us any kind of lasting happiness and peace, then we're much more motivated to go within. And so it was for Chinul and his students. You've heard a number of times in this teisho the expression, tracing the radiance down to a source. That is how he expressed the essence of Zen practice. Turning the light inward and tracing the radiance down to its source. This is what we're doing through our extended out-breath. The extended out-breath is more like a track that helps us focus. And then we use that focus to tune in to something deeper and deeper and deeper within ourselves, to drop out of thoughts, to drop out of our head, to drop out of analysis. This is a challenge for people for some years in Zen practice. And the way we were taught originally out of the Japanese system to practice was to focus only on whatever the koan was, the nub of the koan as it's called, or as they call it in the Korean system, the hwado. In the case of mu, for example, the koan mu, which actually reads, a monk asked Master Josu, does even a dog have the Buddha nature? And Joshu said, mu, which means no. And at a different time, Joshu was asked, does a dog even have the Buddha nature? And that time he said, yes. And the conundrum is that they both answers are actually correct at the very same time. So normally we're taught to focus on mu. It's way too easy to turn that into a mantra and just go mu, 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 mu. And for a long time, we had the understanding that that was how to do it. to sort of force a concentration on this word mu. It wasn't mentioned that there needs to be a need to know what that mu is, a curiosity. There is the statement that the three pillars of Zen are great doubt, great faith, and great determination. So it's easy to understand what great faith and great determination are, but great doubt? It wasn't really till I read Stephen Batchelor's book on great doubt and realized it really is great perplexity, or a sense that there is something deeper than any words can go. And that is something that was not really expressed in the early years of Zen practice in the United States. In some places, it's still not expressed. But as you're doing the extended out breath, there needs to be this essence, this sense of openness to possibility, the not knowing, the beginner's mind, the only don't know that another Korean Soen master expressed. And Chinul put it as, turn the light inward and trace the radiance down to its source. And he had various different ways of meaning, of translating that. Let me quote from Chinul, which was written by Robert Buswell, who spent some years as a Korean monk in the very same monastery that Chinul originally had founded. Only at this point, Robert Buswell is still alive and teaching, although I think he's now emeritus at ZCLA. The viability of all approaches to meditation, in Chinul's view, ultimately derives from the process of tracing the radiance emanating from the mind back to its source, or simply tracing back the radiance. This concept is an essential element of the process, and this is also that same openness to possibility. He reports that it's governing all types of meditation practice. Chinul interprets this, but especially in the Wado oriented approach of faith and understanding according to the complete and sudden teachings. Chinul employs a variety of complementary designations for this aspect of contemplation. Trace the radiance back to one's own mind. The interesting aspect of that is we're using our own mind to trace the radiance back to the source of this mind. It's interesting that after one passes the koan mu, or the first breakthrough koan, whether it's the sound of one hand or our face before our parents were born, the next koan is, what is the source of mu? So, tracing the radiance back to one's own mind, trace the radiance back to one's own nature. In one thought moment, trace the light back and see one's own original nature. Trace back and observe the qualities and functions of your own mind. That is a very comprehensive way to put it. Trace back and observe the qualities of your own mind. This is what Gordy Brune was doing when he focused After some years of zazen at the Rochester Zen Center in a sesshin, and afterwards he said, why didn't somebody tell me it was about exploring your own mind? That is tracing the radiance down to its source, exploring your own mind. But it is essential that it is not done through words. It is essential that it is done through the body, through tuning into the felt sense and being curious, being open to possibility. If we think we know what we're going to find, we're not going to find it, because that assumption that we know what we're going to find is going to be a very tall wall hiding what the truth is. Let's share some more here. Another expression is to observe and reflect on your own mind. But that has some inference of analysis, which we don't want to get into. Reflect on and view your own mind. Mirror your own mind, or simply trace back the radiance. Contemplative reflection, or even introspection, although the path calls it, can be interpreted as reflection, introspection, counter-illumination, or even meditation is what it is speaking of. The dynamic that was expressed. And he also has said to trace back the radiance means to trace the radiance back to the numinous awareness, the numinous awareness of our own mind. For this reason, it is called trace back the radiance. It is also like seeing the radiance of the sun's rays and following it back until you observe the orb itself. If you only take one thing into your practice, it's that you are tracing what is impossible to describe. You are connecting with it, you are feeling it, and you are searching deeply within yourself for the source of this beingness that we are. That is tracing down the radiance. That is doing susokkan. That is doing deep Zen practice. You can let go the rest of the stuff, because what you are searching for are open to the possibility that it will appear to you is this numinous awareness. Numinous awareness is also one of the descriptions that the Tibetan Buddhists use for the quality of mind. Numinous awareness. Nobody there, but inherently there is awareness. It is a very, very deep experience. And when one has had that experience, one normally, if one has had it deeply enough, one has had a Kensho experience, seeing into the nature of the mind. This is why we do Zen practice. This is why everyone is searching in their own way. And it may not be through spiritual work. It may be through trying to make a lot of money, be famous. It may be following all the admonitions of the hype that we hear on television, about if you buy this product, if you live this way, if you live in this part of the country, if you're the right color of skin, if you do the right things, then you will be happy. Unfortunately, that's taking us down a rabbit hole. The only way to be free, so free that even if you are sent to be executed, you are still free. In a tiny cell in some jail in some country where you're getting beaten, as a number of prisoners have been in various different countries. When I was living in Turkey, the expression was, if they put you in jail, they just lock you up and throw away the key. Many jails in many countries, including our own. Rikers Island, for example, are well known for their abuses that can even result in death. So even if you are in such a situation, you can have access to an inherent freedom within yourself that is not denial, that is not being in pain, that is not assuming anything, that is simply experiencing whatever comes towards you freely. And in that freedom, you truly are free. It is quite amazing. I think of the tale of Frankie Parker, who was an American guy who was put on death row for some brutal murders. And he was an incorrigible prisoner. He was spent a good many years in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is considered one of the worst ways to be in prison, because you're left there in this plain room with no interaction with other human beings. You're left alone with yourself. And that can be quite challenging for many people. In fact, there are people who go insane through doing that. But Frankie Parker, after some years in solitary confinement, one of the guards threw in a copy of the Dhammapada. How he got hold of that, one doesn't know. Guards in prisons are not necessarily known as compassionate human beings. They're there to guard and make sure that the prisoners don't get out, and some of them come into the work with a quite negative mind state toward any prisoner, and it can be brutal. So, having nothing else to do, Frankie started reading this thin little book. There are many translations of that book available, by the way. But he focused on what are known as the linked verses. These are, this whole book, the Dhammapada, is known to be the earliest teachings of the Buddha. And the linked verses are, in particularly, one pair of verses is quite profound and right on. And that is the one that says, and I'll have to paraphrase this because I don't have it memorized. Chi-san is miraculous in being able to express this, but I don't have it memorized. She's repeated it so many times over so many decades and so many teishos that I think it's burned into her bones. But a negative thought or a painful thought or well, negative is maybe the best way to put it, thought follows one as the cart follows the ox pulling the cart pulling ox. So whatever you have in your mind, If it's negative, if it's condemning, if it's angry, it's going to follow you. The karma of it is going to follow you, inevitably, without question. Just look at the lives of people who are, for example, angry and are spitting that anger out. Their lives are interwoven with other people who react to that energy, even if it's not expressed, because it doesn't even have to be expressed in words. You can feel it. There are mirror neurons in our brains that allow us to feel unwittingly the emotions of other beings that we're near. In fact, it took me a long time to realize that the feelings that I was feeling were not necessarily my feelings. I was picking up on somebody else's feelings in the area. It had a kind of a funny result in that whenever I was on an airplane, and for years I was flying quite frequently on airplanes. In fact, just in my Zen years, my later Zen years, I ended up a million-miler on United Airlines because I had flown so much. But every time I would be in an airplane and I would feel suddenly very sleepy, I'd look around and I would see three people or one person or the person next to me who was nodding off. And I realized that, I could have been bright and lively when I walked into the airplane, but as soon as I connected with that, the feelings surrounding me, I was one with them, and I would start to fall asleep. It was rather funny. And it got funny also in that sesshin, whenever I was going to sesshin at Tohama Monastery, Mitra-roshi and Chisan would come only a day or two before the sesshin, all the way from Japan, which is 18 hours time difference from us. And of course, they would be nodding off. And I was seated quite often right next to Chisan, and it was really hard to stay awake. The other thing was that when I was head monitor in Rochester during sesshin, I would begin to feel discombobulated. And I realized as I would look around the zendo, because I was facing into the zendo in those days, I would realize that everybody was sort of having a struggle. So as soon as I focused my mind deeply on my practice, the whole tenor of the zendo got more focused. We have an enormous amount of ability to influence our environment, negatively or positively. So if we have a negative thought, and it's easy to have negative thoughts, then we will pay for it. It'll influence our behavior, and that will influence other people around us, and it will result in a certain level of discomfort, if not pain and suffering, for everyone. But the second part of these two linked verses is happiness follows a positive thought, like the shadow that never leaves me. And Frankie Parker somehow resonated with that and became a model prisoner. He started doing Zen practice. Somehow he connected with somebody who taught him how to do Zen practice. And he worked with other prisoners to teach them as well. And his influence on the rest of the jail was quite positive. The negative karma that had come from those murders caught up with him, and he eventually was put to death. But as he was being injected with the whatever it is they use to kill people, he turned and faced the family members of the survivors of the survivors of the people that he had killed, and said, "I'm sorry." No raging against the dying. He simply, his last words were to the people who were related, the people he'd murdered, and he said, "I'm sorry." Tracing the radiance back to its source. Tracing it back to this luminous transparency. The luminous transparency, which is the quality of our own mind. It is luminous, transparent, nothing attached to it, and yet able to comprehend. It is cognitive. That doesn't mean with words. It means it understands and can respond. And when we are let go of the shell that we have built around us to seemingly keep us feeling safe and secure, even though underneath it all we realize it's not going to work, when we gradually erode that shell, as we do through Zazen, we begin to experience some things like fear, because when we step out into the world essentially naked, it can feel a little frightening because we don't know what's going to come and hurt us. But as we go deeper into this numinous transparency, we begin to realize that nothing can truly hurt us in the most absolute way. Sure, things can happen. Things do happen. The reason we developed that shell was because things happened and they were uncomfortable enough that we, like the oyster, developed this protective shell around us. And yet, when we are willing to step out deeply enough, having experienced deeply the true nature of mind, having traced the radiance back closer and closer and closer to its source, exploring the qualities of our own mind, exploring the sensations, exploring and open to possibility, that there's more we can understand, there's deeper we can understand, then we begin little by little to become free. It is something that takes time. And those of you who are willing to be in for the long haul are going to, as long as you really do work at it, be rewarded with this amazingness that we really are, where we don't need that shell, where we don't need that cocoon, that we recognize that there's nobody that can be hurt. Sure, this body can be done stuff with. And there's plenty in the minds of people who are in the first part of that linked verse that can do things. There's some horrible stories from long ago in history, all the way down to the modern times. But there are stories in the other direction too. And there are people who have truly awakened and have experienced firsthand that freedom that we all have built into us and have changed their lives in positive ways. Yes, karma can catch up, as it did with Frankie Parker, but the fact that he had lived his last years with such openness, generosity, faith, and persistence in deepening his practice. And he wouldn't have done that if he hadn't seen something relatively deep. So wherever he is now, it will have had a positive influence ongoingly. We don't need to think about that part. In some ways, it's irrelevant, because the only thing, as the Diamond Sutra says, is right here now. This presence, this absolute presence that we are, this awareness, which is that numinous transparency. So you have the tools, the extended out breath, the focus on the experience in your body of the energies in your bodies, along with that openness to possibility. Or also if you're working on koans too, the same goes for it. Always reaching deeper, always reaching deeper. I thank you for listening, and we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.